past. I mean, you dealt with the primary challenge last year, and we talked a lot about vouchers over an extended period of time. You talked to me about feeling like you had to reach across the aisle even within your own party. So now that the bill is passed, how do you look back and think of the entire process and, an outcome that maybe you didn't quite want, but I remember seeing your statement that you felt you did what you can as well.
Well, exactly right, Shawn. Thanks for allowing me to have our time together this morning. But yes, this past session was kind of a culmination of a lot of the previous sessions. I've been dealing with what they now refer to as vouchers for my 20 years that I've been in the legislature. So being from rural Texas, we care about our public schools, and so we want to make sure that our public schools are properly funded, and that we don't neglect the 5.3 million school children here in Texas. So a lot of statewide leaders have felt for a long time that educational savings accounts, what I call vouchers, are the proper alternative to, quote, in their words, a failing public school system. And I've resisted that and fought against that, and in past sessions I've voted against that expansion of ESAs or vouchers here in Texas. Last election was kind of a watershed moment. Clearly there were statewide leaders who felt that issue should change. And so they spent millions of dollars to try to get me and other like-minded members defeated. Well, they were largely successful. There were 15 mostly rural members targeted for the failure of them to support vouchers. And so 12 of them got beat and 3 of us survived. And so this issue was pretty much decided in the last primary election cycle when those 12 members went down. So when we gathered in January, this was an issue of it's going to happen. So how do we make it as acceptable as possible? We wanted to try to limit that program as much as we could, put some safeguards in it, some blinders, if you will, in it, and kind of limit the money and limit the scope. And also we had an objective, now let's fund our schools, because we haven't been able to fund our public schools over the last 3 sessions because of this voucher issue. And our schools were hurting. There were schools all over the state of Texas that were adopting deficit budgets. And so those 2 objectives were first and foremost in my mind is how do we limit a voucher program to make it as least impactful as possible for my public schools and properly funding public schools here in Texas. So those were the 2 big objectives, and I think we accomplished that.
How do you balance both sides of the public opinion coming out of the decision? Because obviously there's the knee-jerk reaction of, how could he vote for this? And then, there's the discussion that, we kind of touched on, like your backs were against the wall after the primary challenges and seeing your colleagues ousted and now trying to work on a bill that, I guess where there's at least something done, like some type of difference.
Well, I mean, I liken it to your house is on fire. Okay, do you just let it burn, or do you try to rush in and try to save as many valuables as possible? Well, I chose to try to save as many valuables as possible. I've worked with the remaining members of my rural delegation and those of us who care about public education, and we've tried to say, how do we make sure that the program that's going to be adopted in one fashion or another, how do we make sure that that program addresses what everybody says the purpose is, and that's to address kiddos that are trapped in failing institutions? How do we address the special needs children? How do we address families that are looking for an alternative source of funding and opportunities for their children? And so we started in digging deep into that policy and trying to say, okay, how much money are we going to allocate to it? There were some that wanted to allocate much more money to the program. We were able to align around $1 billion for that program over a 2-year biennium. We were able to make sure that that amount of money could not be exceeded in that cycle. We wanted to make sure that there were eligibility standards by which families could take advantage of that money. We wanted to put reasonable limits on the size and extent of the money, $10,500 for a traditional student. And then there were special needs kids that require more money, and we arrived at a figure around $30,000 for that. And so we wanted to make sure that a lot of the money didn't go to families that were making $500,000 or more. I mean, if this is designed for folks who are struggling and families that did not have educational opportunities, then so be it. But if this is designed to simply finance tuition for mostly affluent suburban families who are already in private schools, then we tried to limit that. And I think we've done a good job of limiting that to 20% of the amount of money for those purposes. So we'll see. You know, we'll meet back in 2 years and we'll take a look at the program. It requires the Comptroller of Public Accounts to stand up a program to administer these vouchers. There will have to be an eligibility process, and the Comptroller will set all of that up and then allocate the funds according to the formula that the legislature prescribed. So that was our purpose: limit the amount of money as best we could, limit the eligibility as best we could. And so we'll take a look at that in 2 years from now and see how that's working and see how we need to examine what the purpose is behind the ESAs and see if those purposes are being met.
Obviously, the next session doesn't start tomorrow, which I'm sure you're happy about after this long time period. But with the conflict over an extended period of time around this issue, how do you now, move forward, work together without knowing what else might come down the pipe?
Well, you touched on the question earlier, and I made a commitment to support public education, and that's my primary goal. And I had been against vouchers for all of these years because I thought it took away resources from our public education system. But what became apparent to me is statewide leaders, and elections matter. When we elect statewide leaders that make vouchers a priority for this state, and then they go about taking out 12 to 15 state representatives who oppose them, then pretty much the die is cast. And my job is to try to work with what we have. We have statewide leaders that this is a priority, and so let's how do we manage that? And that was a challenge. This is about relationships. This is about working with other members and our statewide elected officials in order to formulate the best policy with the number of folks who are represented. Keep in mind there are 150 state representatives. I'm just one of 150. There are 31 senators, and we have a lieutenant governor and a governor that presides over all of that. So that 181 plus the 2 elected officials, that's 183 folks that we have to work together to come up with this policy. So while we may work to try to, okay, this is your priority, we'll make that happen, but we're going to need funding over here. And when I say funding, that's funding for my public schools. That's the 5.3 million students here in Texas and families that they are affected. The vouchers affect 100,000 people. So we took care of that 100,000 people. Now let's take care of the 5.3 million school children here in Texas.
How do you foresee the implementation of really both the voucher program and the pay raises and the things that came with the education fund?
Well, again, I consider House Bill 2 a major victory for public education here in this state. That's almost $11 billion more in funding for public education here in Texas. I say 11, it's more like 10 billion with $1 billion for the vouchers and 8.5 billion under House Bill 2, and there's another smaller bill associated with school safety. So all that totals about $10 billion, and I think that's a victory. It's a victory for public education. It's a victory for families here in Texas. Most certainly it's a victory for rural school districts located in House District 72 that have, quite frankly, had to do more with less, as we've had less and less state funding. We have challenges associated with inflation, rising costs of goods and services, personnel costs. All of that has negatively impacted school budgets throughout the state of Texas. So this money that we're able to get under House Bill 2 does a lot of great things. Number one, it gives much needed pay raises for teachers here in Texas. Depending upon whether you have a school that has 5,000 students or more or 5,000 students or less, there are different differentials for pay raises for each teacher in those schools. And what's critically important, and what we were hearing all along, was the Senate wanted to target teacher pay raises. The House wanted to target, and the budget we passed, the bill we passed out of the Texas House, put all the money under basic allotment, which allows the schools the greatest flexibility. The Senate didn't agree with that. They wanted to target teacher pay raises on a large part of it. So we were able to, in the end, accomplish both. We were able to target teacher pay raises with a significant part of that 8.5 billion. That's roughly half, 4.2 billion. But we also created another allotment, which it allows for for pay raises for support personnel, principals, cafeteria workers, bus drivers, all the other people that it takes to run a school here in Texas. We were able to target pay raises for them. And just as important, we were able to target money to allow schools to pay for health care benefits associated with those pay raises, retirement benefits associated with that, rising costs of electricity, rising costs of insurance premiums, all the things that have gone up in schools. We now have a new allotment for that, and we were able to ultimately find about $500 million to fund that, those increases. We funded special needs kids within the public school system. We funded school safety issues. I think all in all, it was a great start. Have we finished the job? The answer is no. The answer is, if you look at how the state has funded schools over the last 10 years, we haven't even kept up with inflation. And so I think this is a good down payment. This is a good start. It's better than we've done over the last 3 sessions. But are we complete in that? No, we're not. And one of the things I would stress is, from the House standpoint, and I think the Senate standpoint, I think there's a commitment to maintain those pay raises in the budget years moving forward.
What does implementation look like as far as ground level? Is that something you can speak to, or is that more of a question for the districts?
School districts, yes. The money is going to be there for them. Certainly the statutory tranches for what we're focused on and they need to fund is in the bill. The direct implication, of course, would be up to the school districts.
Okay, well, thank you. I want to change gears and talk about rural health care. Is there an overview of maybe some of the most important things you were able to do during the session that you could give me?
Well, I don't know exactly the numbers. One of the challenges, Shawn, is you really don't know until you have a debriefing after the session with your staff, find out exactly what happened. There's some 8,500 bills filed. We only passed like 1,200 bills, which is down from previous sessions. But you know, we work on bills that we have, and we were very successful in passing bills, and a lot of them have gone to the governor. But quite frankly, bills that wasn't actually involved with, I may have voted for on the floor, it goes to the Senate. I don't know if the Senate passed it or the governor's going to veto it. We're still within the veto period, so it's difficult to maintain exactly what's happened until we have a debriefing, which we will have with my staff over the weeks to come. But mental health and rural health, very much on the table here in this session. I believe we funded about $235 million for rural health and for our hospitals, try to help our rural hospitals here. Mental health, I know there was a big push to fund mental health beds, particularly throughout the state of Texas. I'm pleased to recall that we did a great job of that in this session. So clearly mental health issues, rural health, delivery of rural health is critically important, and I think we did a good job of funding that.
Okay. Well, I'm going to change gears from there. So would it be safe to say you feel like, I know you've worked a lot on ag, energy, education, but as far as healthcare and rural healthcare goes, like you might not be as well versed in what specifically was going on?
Well, I mean, of course, rural health has been of critical importance to me, and so I wanted to make sure that we passed certain bills that encouraged and actually funded through the budget support for our rural health and our rural hospitals that we have. I am familiar with, again, we made a major financial investment in our rural hospitals, and we bought a lot of new ambulances to meeting the emergency needs of our rural hospitals. So I'm pleased that we've made a good investment in those important issues here during this last session.
I'm going to change gears to water. I know Senator Perry sponsored a bill that was significant for rural water. How do you view the victories of this session in water? I know it's a huge issue. Landowners are always up in arms about water and where's it going and how's it going to be used, and the conversation's always on how can we get more? How can we use it more effectively? How can we find it in places where we haven't found it before? So how do you view that conversation?
Well, I think we had a great session on water. I think Senator Perry was very instrumental in that. We have a huge capital investment in our water infrastructure. Part of that money is going to be used for existing water infrastructure upgrades to cities to go ahead and replace leaking lines and leaking valves. Part of our problem is we have leaky infrastructure, and so we're wasting the water we do have. So that's a piece of the puzzle. But at least half the money, the new money, which I think is around $2.5 billion, or recall is around $2.5 billion, will be used for new water sources. I think that's important also. So I was greatly encouraged by the work that we did on the water infrastructure plan. From an energy standpoint, I wanted to make sure that in part of my legislation dealt with produced water. When you produce oil and gas, there's a byproduct of additional water that comes out of the ground, and that has to be properly disposed of. Well, it makes no sense to me to continually push that water back down to great depths. What we need to make sure is once we got it on top, let's spend the money it takes to treat it so we can reuse it on our crops, reuse it for our cities, reuse it for our industrial needs. And so we've made some great progress. I passed several bills that were directed at that process to encourage beneficial reuse of water here in Texas. And so that's an additional focus that the legislature had this session, not only on taking our existing water infrastructure, trying to make it better and more efficient, finding new additional water, but also trying to reuse the water we have from a standpoint of oil and gas drilling operations. And so I think we've made great progress in that.
Before I kind of ask one more question to kind of wrap us up, is there anything we missed or anything else you want to talk about?
I think this is a session where we address some of the property tax concerns. Clearly, property taxes is how we fund local infrastructure here in this state. We fund our cities, our counties, our schools, largely through local property tax effort. I think the legislature is hearing the cries that our property taxes are too high. Keep in mind the state of Texas does not collect any property taxes, but I think one of the good things we were able to achieve, and we're going to need voter buy-in in the fall, we're trying to increase the homestead exemption from $100,000 to $140,000 for a single-family residence. I think that's a good thing. We're also, for senior citizens and folks with those citizens over 65 and those with a disability, we're trying to increase that from $110,000 to $200,000. And again, that's going to take a constitutional amendment, but I think that will give some property tax relief to a large segment of our property taxpayers here in Texas. We were also able to increase the personal property tax exemption from $2,500 to $125,000. That's also, I think, going to have a profound effect upon people who pay personal property taxes here in Texas. So I would point to that as a singular success also. They were able to address some of the concerns that people have about their property taxes.
I think this will be my last question unless I come up with another one, and I
Okay.
guess that's always how it is, you know.
Yes.
But when you look at the session as a whole, I want to talk about the energy just expended. You talked to me a little bit about, you know, long hours, coming in early. I know you all were slammed, especially over these past few weeks leading up to the end of session. So when you take that time to exhale, look back at what was done, look back at maybe what needs to be done, what are you kind of thinking in that moment? Is there any overarching thought that's like, man, if I can take away one thing, this is what I'd take away?
Well, I think the one thing is we had a lot of effort this session to address the needs of the people of Texas, and I think we did a good job. Did we get everything done that we wanted to get done? No, but I think that's kind of part of life. That's part of families. Not everybody gets all their way all their time. So I think the legislature, under the leadership of Speaker Burrows, did a great job of determining what our priorities should be and then working to achieve those goals. And so it was a group effort. Clearly, the legislature as a whole, the Texas House and the Senate, worked together to pass some very meaningful legislation that addressed the most glaring needs of the state. We were able to put more money into transportation, some $30 billion. I think we are equipped to look at this proliferation of AI in the state of Texas, the need for more data centers. We took a long, hard look at our grid and how we make sure that it's able to withstand this projected growth and still provide the electric needs for all of Texans. Is there more work to do? Yes, absolutely, there's more work to do. But do I feel good that we made a step in a lot of key issues? Yes. I feel comfortable that we moved the ball forward on a lot of key issues facing Texans.